Welcome back everyone to a new episode of Database version 2.6. So let's get into the news this month. There's been quite a lot. Naughty Dog are back in the headlines, and again, sadly, a lot of people have commented on this, both positive and negative, around the fact that there's a lot of remasters. We've got another remaster of The Last of Us. Again, this time the sequel, which we've already had updated on PlayStation 5, but fundamentally this is probably, in my opinion, related to the work that was ongoing and has currently been postponed or delayed again in terms of factions. But this is a nice update. It's going to come out early part of next year, so they're obviously working on updating this with the improvements and enhancements they made to the engine and the porting of The Last of Us Remastered Part 1 on the PS5 and PC. So I'm assuming this will come on PS5. It's a £10 or $10 upgrade if you've got the existing version on PS4, which is great. There's two modes. There's a full 4K 30 FPS and a full 1440p 60 FPS. And it isn't going to make a huge difference over what we already had on the PS5 updated version for the Pro, but there is a lot of new content. So the Lost Levels is a great bonus. I think that's really good, kind of like director's commentary that you get on DVDs and stuff. That's great. You've got the No Return mode, which I think looks brilliant, and that really works with the game and almost kind of fills the gap with what was the hopefully planned factions. If that still comes, I think it would be great, but for whatever reason they can't get that worked out. But visually, I don't think you're going to see a huge difference here. It looks very, very nice in the trailers, and obviously it's a beautiful looking game. It still stands as one of the best looking games across all generations. The PS4 version is astounding in terms of the quality that Naughty Dog got out of the engine and the hardware. And the PS5 version isn't a rebuilt game. It's still a last generation game at heart. And the new areas they've added to the game are going to be great. Now, the thing I want to discuss here is the game looks great, and I'm sure it will be as good as it ever was in terms of gameplay and the combat and the AI. All of that, I think, is absolutely superb. I made a tweet about this, and my concern isn't the fact that does it affect ongoing development of current games? No, I've said this before. Naughty Dog are a big team and big studios. They have multiple silos going on, so they'll have multiple developments and things in planning stages, things in development stages, proof of concepts, all of those things that build. I said this on my last video about the fact that when things ramp up, if it gets the green light, it gets milestones attached and away you go. So no, this isn't affecting that. This is kind of almost, I would imagine, a commercial decision to recoup some of the losses and get something out. So there's been a lot of work in terms of getting a new updated version that would have been built on the back of The Last of Us Part 2. And this is almost the case of what we need to recoup some of that loss, guys, because we've been working on this for the past, 2 years or whatever it has been in terms of full-on development, and therefore they're flipping this. It's a $10 upgrade. You can't moan at that. If you don't want it, you've still got it. If you've already owned the game, put the PS4 version in, update it, and get the 60 FPS mode. You're not missing anything out. So anyone moaning about it is just making a noise for no reason. Because if you're not going to buy it, then don't buy it. You don't have to. But it kind of makes no sense. If somebody's off, if they were selling this at full price only, then there'd be an argument. But there's not. So Sony are aware, and they've read the room again. They made some mistakes before, and they've fixed it this time. So that's fine. It's likely a short flip. Because of the extended delay and the potential cease of that faction multiplayer. And it's, like I say, it's possibly connected to that. I do think it is connected to that. But it won't affect anything that's ongoing internally. There'll be other things in the pipeline. And this is a stopgap. This is something to keep the coffers filled. You've got to keep the till ringing at some point. You can't keep spending money on development and making stuff and not making much money. And The Last of Us Part 1 on PC, I mean, I don't even know how it did directly on PS5, but it didn't sell amazingly well because of the troubled launch. Although, like I covered in my review at the time, it was never as bad as everyone made out. It absolutely preferred AMD hardware, understandably, and that's not as if that hasn't happened before, Starfield anyone, but people kicked off and went mad. But as you can see here, launch day code, so review code, this is review code running on an RX 580 at 4K FSR3 upscaled, ultra performance. Do you know what? Looks great, ran great, I had no real issues. There was a few bugs and issues in the game, absolutely, but no more than any other game we've played. The game got a lot of flack. So all that aside, £10 I think is great, and it's well worth it. But I would have liked and want to see a new game, or even a modern take on an older classic, such as Jak and Daxter, like the Legacy precursor or whatever. That could be an amazing one. And it would feel fresh and probably more positive than such a small pool they've picked from here. They're oversaturating the market in terms of getting more The Last of Us stuff out. I mean, it's The Last of Us and Uncharted. That's kind of been this cycle of release, update, port, remaster. And I get that there's a new season of the show, and it was huge, and it's they've got to get something out, and that's probably a big reason why they've got this out, because the factions are probably tied to it, and they need something to piggyback on that impact that the next season will have. And the new season is going to be big, I'm sure, and this is a big reason why that's out. But overall, I'm not blown away by another remaster, because Naughty Dog are better than this. They've got a lot of talent in there, although, studios change, people leave. So the people that made the prior games, a lot of them are already gone, long since gone. A lot of the writers have gone, developers have gone. And I know that Christian Geiling has decided to leave. And he's one of the main engineers in the team. The new one's taken over as the technical director. And that makes a lot of sense in terms of pushing things forward. But new teams, new people, that changes the direction of a lot of things. So people always talk about studios as if they stay static. People make studios. I said this before, people make games. Hardware doesn't. So if the people change in a company, that company is no longer the same company it was. It's got the same name, but different people are making the games, because that's how it works. So realistically, I'm not blown away, and I would like to have seen and hope that this rumored space game or whatever's in development from Naughty Dog comes out soon. I do think they're going to move towards open world. I do think they're going to go towards that Red Dead Redemption style, Rockstar level of quality. They're already close in terms of their animation, the motion blending, motion matching. Everything they do in their engine is superb. There's a base there that doesn't need to be significantly enhanced, but I want to see it getting pushed on the PS5. With 30 FPS, 1440p. Really go hard on that. 30 FPS and use that CPU power to add simulation. The graphics here look amazing. We don't need any more. So I just want to see something good from Naughty Dog. I'm not worried, concerned that they're not making games, but I am a little disappointed that we haven't seen something new from them on the PS5 generation, and that's 3 years in. So it would be good to see the Sony teams pick up some of the gap and slack that they've got in terms of first-party games. So that's where I sit with The Last of Us Remastered. PlayStation Portal. I was asked about this on Twitter. So I didn't get a review one from Sony for whatever reason. I didn't get sent a review, but I kind of understand that, because I think my market isn't really going to benefit this, and I'm going to be pretty harsh on a streaming mechanism like I was on PS Now. The problem with streaming is it's always going to be dependent on so many external factors, and a machine like this is filling a gap of a phone. So a phone could do a good job, but depending on the quality of your phone and the controller you've got, this is a fixed experience within reason that Sony are delivering. It looks as I thought when I'd covered it before. It's got a purpose. I understand it. It makes sense. It connects via your home Wi-Fi. So you've got all those caveats in terms of how good is your router, how good is your connection, how good is your build. Your house can affect it. So if you've got a lot of internal, external walls and you're working through that will block your Wi-Fi signal. That's going to affect the image quality. You're going to get a lot of macro blocking. So a lot of it is wrapped up in how well it compresses and streams the data. We'll see how that works in terms of overall presentation. But yeah, I'm trying to get one, but they're out of stock. They've sold really well, but that's again how many they put out to be made and sold. A lot of ones are online being gouged by scalpers, as always the case. So there is a little bit of that as well in terms of they sold out because people think they're going to make a quick buck off it. But I do think there's a market for it. And I do think it's a stepping stone. So like I said before, I think this is Sony putting their toe in the water in terms of what could they do to expand their mobile market and their streaming market. And they've got a lot of infrastructure around PS Now and PS Plus and everything else that means that could be quite a potential leap forward. But I'm not going to be blown away by the device. It's a handheld, portable streaming service. You've seen PS Now can be poor on a home connection on a laptop or a PC. So it's not as if we're going to see amazing quality on the PlayStation Portal. I didn't get one for review. I will try and pick one up at some point, but I don't expect it to be a huge thing that I'm going to cover in detail if I do get hold of one. I will cover it, but at the moment, it is what it is. If you are in the market for playing your PS5 somewhere else in your house and leave the TV to your kids or wife, then it makes sense. Outside of that, I don't really see the point of it. And that's fine, because there doesn't need to be a market for everyone. This is another thing that kind of drives me to distraction. I saw reviews of it, and people are saying things like, who's this for? There's no market for this. It's overpriced of what it does. Right. This is so. My view of reviews is this. Okay, it's dead simple, right? I don't play tennis, so should I not see any benefit in the myriad of tennis rackets that are out there? No, because somebody has a value for them and there's a market. So you should never start your review, and some people had their entire review based around it, like, who's this for? I don't understand the point of it. That's not the point of a review. A review is to give people who are interested in the item the information they need to know. So, example, I did my TV LED in depth. I do all my things in depth so that I give you the information you want. I've said on the review, they're not for me. I'm not into all flashy lights everywhere and LEDs. That's not my thing. But I can separate that and give you information that's helpful. That's the point of a review. And opinions can creep in at the end. So there's no reason to, at the end of it, review it for what it is as a standalone piece of hardware in terms of what it delivers, the quality, everything else. And at the end of it, say, for me, I'd never pay £199 for this because it doesn't make any sense for me. I wouldn't use it. That's fine. That's information and opinion added to the review, which some people can take or ignore. That's the point of a review, and I do that in all my reviews. You can have opinions, you have to have opinions, but you've got to split the two off. And I just find it mad that we've got entire reviews based on the fact that it doesn't make any sense for it to exist. Why isn't it another PS Vita? Hang on, what's the point in that? It's literally like reviewing an RTX 4060 and saying, well, it's not a 4090. Well, I know, because it's a 4060. That's the point of it. So I find reviews have gone really mad in terms of losing focus of what they're supposed to be. But rant over. Next one was one that a bit delayed. I wanted to cover this a while ago, and I did start doing something, but a lot of work and everything else. But FSR3. So I know it launched last month on 2 games, and it's still only 2 games in terms of what AMD have delivered. Their fluid motion frames, as it's called, and it was Forspoken, which has had loads of updates, and the Unreal Engine 5 powered Immortals of Avium, as you can see here, which I've been doing comparisons with. And I'll be doing a more detailed video on this, but I wanted to kind of present my first thoughts and findings on it. So again, apologies for being a little bit late. Quickly though, what is fluid motion frames? Well, it's really it's kind of another version of frame interpolation that many TVs have been doing for years. So soap opera effect you see when a TV's turned on and it's a 30 FPS or 24 FPS, it kind of looks fast motion and slightly blurry, and soap operas are filmed that way because they're filmed with digital cameras, cheap cameras, high frame rates, not 24 FPS, so it doesn't create the same image because it's not film. And what it does is interpolation creates a new frame in the middle, so in between the first and the third. So you interpolate that information from frame 1 and frame 3, and you create a mid frame, which is smoother, and it allows that interpolation data to come in from before and after. And it means that you have a slow feed. You've got to delay it effectively because you've got to render frame 3 before you can render frame 2. So you have to hold frames back, and that adds lag. So you have sufficient time to sample these 2 frames in between each other and generate that intermediary frame. And that's perfect for TV because the lag there doesn't matter. You're just watching it. It's non-interactive media. So you're just watching a TV or a movie and it's perfect. And it really helps fluidity. But for games, it's got a key serious problem and a disadvantage. And this is true of all the solutions, NVIDIA's DLSS3, namely that the solution increases the GPU load and it adds a good deal of latency, meaning everything gets slower. And I said that when DLSS3 came out and the impact it was going to have, which is why the anti-lag latency reduction was so strongly pushed with DLSS3, and NVIDIA and AMD have been pushing it on both of their respective drivers and dashboards. And now AMD are here with their solution. And it kind of made me chuckle when I looked at the reviews last month when it came out, and I saw the silver bullet prior was like, it's perfect, it adds performance quality, and then you had everyone going, oh, actually it's got issues and it compromises on the latency. And everyone all of a sudden recognizes the issues that come with interpolated frames. And it just always feels to me like marketing. It just comes from so many places now that it's not. You've got tech reviewers and reviewers, in quotes, that are nothing more than an extension of marketing. And you can have, I get review stuff. I get given stuff all the time, games, hardware, and I cover it and say this is what, but it's my genuine, honest view. And I've said at the start, this is never going to be perfect because it adds latency. So you've got to really drive other areas of the game to get that latency down. It's never going to be as good as a native 60 FPS title if you're getting there via interpolated frames. But it can add a benefit if you can't achieve it through pure grunt. And Many of the views now for DLSS3 carry over to what the NVIDIA solution was offering, but that is exclusive to 4000 cards, remember. You can't get it on anything else. And AMD continues to be open, at least, and you can run this solution on RDNA 5000 upwards. And it'll also run, as you see here, on my RTX 2070 card. So 2000 upwards cards can run it. And just like FSR2, they're extending the life of NVIDIA cards along with their own, which is something NVIDIA never do. But the market seems to just accept it, and it's bonkers. And reviewers don't call it out anywhere near enough either. AMD are in the back seat. I get that. So NVIDIA don't have to do it, and AMD are doing it. Even if you're an NVIDIA lover and you support them through and through, which is fine, you've got to be able to see the problems that this presents and where AMD are trying to shake up and disrupt the market. And it's good. In terms of performance, yeah, it adds lag. It adds quite a bit of lag, and you can feel it, certainly on a mouse. But the biggest issue is the consistency of that compute job and how it presents each frame. You can see a quick example here in the frame time graph using my overlay. And effectively, when you turn it on, as you would expect, frame times go all over the place because it's just shooting up and down, up and down, up and down. And you feel this because you get very inconsistent frame delivery with this game. Anyway, I haven't tested for Spoken yet. But with Avium, it's all over the place on this particular card. Some of that's memory related, I think. The 8GB is just too much for the settings I've got here. So I've had to set it at 1620p, ultra settings to try and max the machine out, and then shift through the different areas. And even then, I'm getting to like 30 FPS with it on. So I'm interpolating frames to 30-ish, some of the heavier sections. And it means that you're not getting a fixed load in the engine, and those frames aren't being presented in even cadence. They're uneven. They're all over the place. And compared to the same hardware and settings, just running the game without it, it doesn't feel that much better. I will dive more into this with my tried and true latency testing and numbers and all that to reinforce it. But let's say you've got a game that's 50 FPS-ish native, and it can get to 90 FPS-ish using FSR3. The screen presentation and input latency is slightly worse, both in numbers and feel to the player. As the first stab at this, though, it's a great start, and it will certainly improve as the algorithm does, along with wider engine adoption. But the really good news is the quality of those interpolated frames and shifted pixels is excellent. Slowed down here with the native one on the left and going up the stack to the right, the presentation is very close to just standard FSR2 balanced with it on. Motion blur, it really struggles with, and motion, you get a lot of blocky, pixelated silhouettes and cutouts. You can see the alpha masking and everything on the slowed down shots here as I pause it. And that's one of the issues. So any fast motion, there's no previous data. Things appear on screen out of nowhere. It blends. And the game anyway. So you got to remember the inherent engine structure of TAA and how it generates its frames. Any sparse shading is going to affect these kind of reconstruction techniques. You can see on the left, with it being native 1620p, it still has ghosting and dithering and sparse shading effects. And that's the problem with this. If it's in the engine inherently, then any reconstructed technique, DLSS included, is going to make that worse. It's just going to exacerbate that problem. And that's what you see. So going across to the right, you can see that it just gets progressively worse, and then you get those additional artifacts and breakup. But realistically, when you play it in normal play, it does a good job, and you can get better performance and better frame rates with impact to latency, obviously, over and above not using it. And the fact that they're so close already in the very first attempt, and that's pretty impressive, I must admit. It's not a bad result considering that this is the very first time they've done it, and it will improve. There is some issues inherently in this game anyway. People raved about the game being beautiful, and I just don't see it. It's got some good tech, but I don't know, it feels like a tech demo, and it's not a fun game to play. But overall, visually, I'm quite impressed with how good FSR3 is in this first look, and we'll be diving into it far more. And on top of this, obviously, they released in preview anyway that their fluid motion driver update, so you can actually attempt to do this kind of interpolated frames on all DX11 and DX12 tiles. Now, it's never going to match the quality of FSR3 here, which is implemented within the engine and thus has far more data to improve the image quality, such as those motion vectors, the geometry data, the color buffers, and even where and when it is, such as the UI and alpha effects and stuff. All of that will have various egregious artifacts and issues for each developer and players alike. But taking a couple of sample titles in the driver element to just boost the game up, it does kind of almost double performance for free. It really helps on CPU limited titles, and that's really where this solution makes sense. So for racing games or RTS games that can have very high CPU demands at times, this could help reduce those. And certainly for RTS, the impact on latency is not going to make that much of a difference. But again, the biggest giveaway is the fact that it does affect it. And even though it's a driver solution right now, you can turn it on and off. It still needs some work. And I salute the fact that AMD have gone out of their way to add this within their Adrenalin driver kind of suite. And it's far better than NVIDIA's now across the board. And you don't need an AMD account just to access it, which I absolutely hate anyway. That drives me to distraction. But overall, FSR3, I think, is a great starting point, and I'm quite impressed with the quality on offer here. And it really does, like I say, present some options, I think, for consoles where you want to get to higher frame rates. Again, people say you can't do it other than 60, and they even advise that, and I agree. And I think that's around the fact that if you've got too big a gap, the image quality, as you see on some of these examples, when it's low frame rates of 15, 20, there's just not enough data. So you end up with a lot more artifacts than you would if it's 60 FPS, because the consistency and the persistence, effectively, of that interpolated frame is much shorter. If you're running at 60 FPS, you're only getting one frame for 60 milliseconds. But if you're doubling it to 120, you're only seeing it for 8 milliseconds, which means it has less of an impact on your visibility of the issues. So that's one area, I think, why people push their frame rates up. But if you just want a smoother, more consistent experience, then it is there. But like I say, TVs have been doing this for ages, and they add latency when they turn it on. That's why these motion smoothing options, people turn them off for gaming, because it affects your input latency. This is just a far more advanced, embedded solution within the engine, but it's doing the same thing. There's nothing new here. It's just iterative improvements on what already exists. But it's good that AMD have got their solution out in the open. So next up we have the Game Awards. Yes, the official Game Awards, which really are the Oscars of the gaming industry at this point, and that is kind of where my view of these things sit. I said this on Twitter or X, whatever. That this is really around the fact that these are kind of the awards for the awards. I mean, the nominations are getting bigger. I know everyone goes on about the best game of the year, but for me, maybe it's my age. I just don't care. I'm in my 50s now, so it doesn't really matter to me. But the Oscars have always been kind of irrelevant to the mainstream industry, customer base of movies. When in the heyday, 70s, 80s, mid 90s, when films were at their peak, I think. For example, I remember the 1983 Oscars. So Blade Runner lost out on Best Art Direction to Gandhi, which itself is a great film. Yeah, but it's simply not pushing pioneering genre-defining art as Blade Runner was. And again, it never even got a nomination for Best Soundtrack from Vangelis, which was a genius and wholly original soundtrack, but also no nomination at all for cinematography. Blasphemy for such a movie, let's be honest. And Best Visual Effects, E.T. won, which admittedly was, deservedly so. It was a great film. But Wrath of Khan was not even noted in that area, and it was the very first movie to have complete CGI shots within it. And if you've seen the film, it's an amazing one. It's got loads of great visual effects for its time. And how is a film that pioneered the first in-cinema CGI shot not changing the landscape for how things changed in the industry in 1982? I love that film. I think it's still one of the best Star Trek films in my opinion. But kind of the list of, issues and problems with the Oscars goes on and on. I mean, the thing never even saw any nominations for sound, for music, for makeup effects, nothing in the same year. RoboCop won nothing in the year it was beaten by The Last Emperor, which again, showing that the Oscars always were awards by themselves, for themselves, and it wasn't based on the audience at all. I could go on and on about this. I mean, how did Basil Podorus not get nominated for his soundtrack for RoboCop, or Conan the Barbarian earlier? Or like Rick Baker, superb makeup artist, one of my favourites as a child, and rightly won for American Werewolf in London in whatever year that was. But won again for Harry and the Hendersons over Rob Bottin for RoboCop. And, the Phil Tippett area of RoboCop, it wasn't even nominated. Suffice to say, my views on the industry awards were built on that as a moviegoer in the 80s as a teenager. And the Game Awards, like this, they're the same thing. This is no more apparent than one of the best games from a quality, story and production perspective and range Hogwarts Legacy didn't even get a single mention, let alone a vote, which speaks volumes of the failed attempts of parts of the media. And like there's so many angry people online, they tried to make about the game. All those reasons aside, which backfired. It made it, or at least it helped make it one of the most successful games of the year, and it likely helped its numbers. And as the old saying goes, there's no such thing as bad publicity. I mean, the Barbie movie was another one. That same furore online from lots of disgruntled and angry young peeps and being angry about things they never even watched. I'm sure that helped drive that to be a huge success, which it also was. The fact is, awards for art, such as movies, games, and music, should always be on the subject itself and not any politics. If something impacts and drives things forward, or is very successful in the zeitgeist at the time, such as the Switch port, putting that terrible Mortal Kombat 11 to shame in terms of the quality of the port. It's got its issues, and I reviewed it on IGN, but fundamentally it's a very impressive port considering the hardware and the size and scale of the game. So the categories themselves, they all kind of say a great deal to me. I mean, most anticipated game. I mean, as per the requirements note on the award ceremony themselves, as you can see on screen, a game that, what does it say? Hang on 1 second, let me bring it up so you can see it with me. Games for impact. I mean, I'm looking at some of the games for impact. What does that even mean? Some people may think that Call of Duty is relevant. I don't, but it could easily be in there. Most anticipated game. There we go. So what does it say? It says, recognising an announced game that has demonstrably illustrated potential to push the gaming medium forward. Tekken 8. How is Tekken 8 pushing the medium forward? How is Life of a Dragon, Infinite Wealth pushing things forward? I don't understand. I mean, 5 of these 6 games are all sequels, and the others are kind of a third-person, open-level Star Wars game. How is that pushing things forward? This is what I mean. It doesn't, and this is just like the Oscars, it's exactly the same. As an example, how did not just one of these games, say Tekken 8, get swapped out for something, I don't know, like Lo-Fi, which is an open city first-person VR adventure that allows you to live out your Blade Runner fantasies with open-ended gameplay, story, even arcades and tasks. And this feels like a huge step forward in VR gaming, bringing large-scale micro and macro detail worlds like Shenmue into the VR space. And that seems to be doing more for the technology in industry than pretty much everything else on this list. Certainly Tekken 8, Final Fantasy, but what do I know? The best indie. Where is Teon with Robocop, which was largely shunned by many media outlets and yet loved by most of us? Humanity, again, as an indie team. The point is, these things are kind of subjective, I get that, but the best game of the year should, at the very least, be based on media and customer results and sales. And that all of those things put Hogwarts ahead of many that made the list. And it's why I enjoy these events. I do like, where people come together and we celebrate some of the things that we're into. More so the teams that work hard on all these games. But I also feel for the impact it must have on those teams that didn't even get noted. And many more that are not even mentioned. That did all the work, all the effort, and probably more in some ways or less. Who can really judge these things? And by not getting a nomination, it's almost like, well, why should I make these kind of games if people don't pick up on them? Everyone that made Hogwarts put a lot of care and attention to that game. You can see it. And they don't share any moral view that anyone may or may not have. And that's kind of a shame because they're being shunned based on external forces. And that shouldn't be the case. And this is why, since forever, I pay little credence to big industry awards in movies, music, gaming and such. Because it's never often my view. And the award ceremony never aligns very closely with what I hold dear or what I enjoy. And therefore, I don't take much value in it. It's great that it's there, but I think it should be more balanced across what it's representing. Let me check, but I don't even think there's a user. Is there a user's opinion-based category? Let's have a look. So what we got? We got Game of the Year, Best Game, Best Narrative, Best Art, Best Performance, Innovation, Impact, Best Debut, Best Mobile, Best Action Game. Best Action Game has got one of mine in there, which I was happy about. One of my favourite games of the year. Yeah, there it is. Armored Core 6, super duper. That deserves to be in there. But yeah, there's nothing. So there's no Viewers' Choice Award effectively. Where's that? I mean, that's like the basic thing. I know people say, well, you get to vote on this, so make your... But that's not the same thing, is it? Because somebody else has picked the categories. So what if you don't like any of the ones that have been picked for Best Art Direction or Best Narrative or best score and music. If you don't like the choices and you've got a game that you like, you don't even get to put it in. So again, to me, it's just like the Oscars. It literally is the equivalent of the Oscars, and that means it's largely irrelevant to the likes of me. Doesn't mean that I don't think it should be there, because it should, and I like the fact that it's a celebration of it. But whether you like anything to do with Hogwarts, and I don't even like Harry Potter, it's totally not my thing, but you can't deny the quality and talent that was involved in making the games, all the games that came out on all the systems. And it really, it had its issues in performance, but it certainly was by far and away nowhere near the worst. And you've got games that had massive issues at launch, such as Jedi Survivor, and that's in there. So I can't see any reason why it wasn't there other than politics. And to me, that's just a bit of a shame. So it's a shame to all the people that worked hard on that game, and it shouldn't be the case. What's next? Just saw this week Xbox sales in Europe have crashed. An IGN tool, which is very good, very insightful in terms of, I think, what are they down now? 54% down. PlayStation 5 is up. Switches are up. It's just mad. And again, people will jump on me. I'm sure I'll get comments everywhere saying that I hate on Xbox. It's not about that, but they don't innovate. They don't change anything. They haven't done anything. This generation has been by far and away their worst generation. They've literally took their foot off the gas and they're drifting. I made a comment on Twitter and I got a lot of comments exactly saying the same thing, and I agree. That's what I've been saying for years. If you don't make first-party games, if you don't put the effort in, if you don't even differentiate your console from the console you made last year or last generation, then where are you at that point? If you're making a console that looks and feels and has the same UI and operating system, and generally doesn't have much of a difference between the Xbox One and the Xbox Series X. There's the visuals and all that stuff, absolutely, loading times, yes. But from a user perspective, they look the same. They feel the same. You don't get much of a difference. You even get 120 4K options on an Xbox One S, for Pete's sake. So the average consumer is not going to pick up on the fact that they're not doing the same thing. And that's what I mean. That's low level. It's not generation defining. And they called that out early on, but now they're paying the price for doing that. If you don't give people a relevant reason to upgrade, you end up with apathy. And apathy is everything that sums up Xbox, in my opinion. They're not making good games. They're not even making many games. They've had the weakest first-party launches ever. They've spent billions upon billions buying everyone else in the industry to try and get those games. And the old end point to that is to just boost Game Pass. And now they're so bad that they're quoting that PlayStation and Nintendo users are Xbox users. In what world is that? That is their end game. I've always said that's their end game. They're going to give up the hardware base. And, a lot of people called me out and said I was wrong. I guarantee you that's where they're going to go. They're even making nods to that about the fact that if Game Pass doesn't hit those numbers, it's going to get there. The sales represent the effort, or lack thereof, that Xbox have put into the marketplace. And Sony haven't. Sony have put the effort in. They've tried really hard. They've kept the momentum of PlayStation 5 going. They've been in high demand. And now it's in stock. We're seeing sales shoot up because people feel like they're buying into something that's got a lifespan. Whereas on the Xbox, if you're not in the middle of it all and understand what's going on around it all you see is, well, Sony have got all this stuff going on, advertising, they're bringing new games to the party, they're linked with all these big games. You see FIFA on TV, it's got Sony logos over it. You got Call of Duty, Sony logos all over it. Xbox are not doing enough to push their brand. They're just letting it fester. And a lot of it is around the fact that they just don't have the people there that are passionate about games. That's a problem everywhere when things get successful. People start worrying more about the outward profile and being involved in that than pushing the media and entertainment industry forward, which is what is good and upcoming. VR, for example, Sony are pushing that forward, along with the likes of Facebook, Meta Quest, whatever stupid name they've got up this week. The fact is that it's a growing industry that takes effort and investment, and Sony are putting that in. They're bringing out mobile devices, like I just said earlier, with the PlayStation Portal. Okay, maybe not where everyone's cup of tea, might be very niche, but that's how you drive innovation and that's how you drive marketplace. What's Xbox doing? They chase their tail. They chase everyone else's tail. They always have. They chase the market. They don't innovate. There's a famous quote from Steve Jobs from years ago, and people use it as a meme, and I get it, and it's true. And I remember it when it came out, and it said it is absolutely true. Microsoft don't have any of the inherent talent within. They don't have class, as he said. And they don't, because they don't understand the concept of, you don't tell people your product is great, you show people it's great. And that's what Xbox and Microsoft don't get. They keep saying, you need to love us because we are great, but they don't give you any reason to believe it. It's actions speak louder than words. And yet here we are with Xbox failing year on year. And that's because they've took their eye off the console market, and they're worrying about the online subscription market, which has always been Microsoft's thing. They live on the mantra of software is perfect, write once, sell many, and that's the whole point of what they do, and they're doing it again.
And Microsoft's just, it's McDonald's. That's what saddens me.
So they haven't changed their end game. They just saw back in the day when Sony were getting popular with the PlayStation, we need some of that action. Let's get in and get that TV in the living room. Let's get that action there. Let's get in, let's grab it, let's own it. And that's why, fundamentally, I'm not a fan of what Microsoft do, because they don't tend to bring value. I mean, if you look at the Xbox 360, they bought some of the biggest games they got. They bought Halo off of Bungie and snapped them away from Apple and the Mac. I know it came out in the Mac, but they took the ownership of that brand and the company, and that was their main aim. They saw somebody else's work going somewhere else, and they bought it. Gears of War was Epic owned for years, and then they bought it off them, and they've kind of let that die. So this is what I mean. You can be a defender of Xbox, and Sony have made all their mistakes as well, and so have Nintendo. No one's infallible. The PlayStation 3 was a complete cluster for Sony in terms of decisions they made, how they launched it, the people they had, which a lot of them were just people that have literally done what I've just said. They got successful when they were hungry with the PlayStation, like Phil. What was his name? Phil Harris. And then when he got successful and became a big corporate exec, he took his foot off the gas and became a corporate exec, which people disconnect with. And that's what the PlayStation 3 launch was. It was a bunch of corporate people doing, and I've been in many of these, millions of these ticking things over my years, boring you to death with PowerPoint slides, talking about things you don't care about. And they themselves don't really understand, which is far too common in the corporate world. PlayStation have done it. Xbox consistently do it. And as bad as the Xbox One launch was, and it certainly was going down that route, it still isn't as bad as what Phil's done. People praise Phil, but I think he's the worst thing that's happened to Xbox. I had faith in him early on, but it turns out that his whole end game was not what everyone hoped it was. I mean, I did see it earlier on. 2015, that's when I saw they were changing. The ship was shifting course, changing direction. And to put some perspective on this, because it's all about facts. That's what most things are opinion based nowadays, and I that's fine, but we should always be based on and built on facts, and that's how I build my view. I build it on facts. I've been doing this for years and years and years, working in this environment. So let's kind of look at some of the basics. So 2 years in, the Xbox One had sold approximately 19 million by December 2015, according to EA's finance report. And we know from official figures from Xbox, in June, both Series X and Series S had sold 21 million-ish, yeah? They say up to, so it could be 20 million, could be 21.5 million. So give or take, two SKUs have sold fewer units than the previous generation, which we know ended with PS4 more than double the Xbox One, from Microsoft's own words. So this gen, we already had a 2-to-1 ratio, and over in many areas. But the rot really started with the Xbox One generation. This is kind of reinforcing what I've just discussed. When Xbox purchased the big game at the time in Mahjong and that Minecraft game, this helped boost their gaming revenue substantially, as it was a veritable cash cow, let's be honest. But even this wasn't enough to keep them in the positive. But the self-destructive action from 2015 onwards of shipping all your games on PC day and date and removing the biggest drive for a console, the exclusives, that was a big mistake. I mean, things like Quantum Break, which is an excellent game, shipping that on PC and Xbox day one, that shifted everyone's view in the market, and that's kind of what I don't understand why they did it so soon. But I get the end game, like I said at the time, I understand where they were going, but this is Microsoft. They don't have any vision. They don't see what their actions will cause. They just see an end game that means this will give us more revenue, won't it, guys? And everyone just says yes. But no one thinks about the fact, because they're not in the market. They're not their own market. Sony's full of gamers and people that play games and understand the market, and Microsoft's full of corporate execs that just want to make more money or be popular. And effectively, this gave Sony an own goal, and it killed a huge portion of their own potential market of dual console owners. In reality, it probably helped boost the PC market, due to this being one of the main reasons they were going for, which was Game Pass. And then they saw that and thought, you know what, let's push Game Pass to PC and have 2 split SKUs, which is what they did. And that's, again, trying to maximise the revenue, because they look at the data, they look at the information, and they just chase the market, and which is what they've done. So the reality is Xbox are in this position, and as you can see on screen, a graph, I just quickly pulled out the numbers. These aren't 100% accurate, and these are all based on, you know, finance reports, forecasting, and reported information across the industry. Cumulative figures were up to the sales point. You can see the gap started to build from 2015, 2016, and that's when they shifted the market. They were close. They were definitely not going to beat PlayStation, absolutely, but they were doing 40% behind, kind of 50% behind, that kind of level, and then it just shoots up to double, and then it just carried on for the rest of the generation, and that's where they started this one. And then look at the basics, look at the exclusives. Here's a quick chart of the exclusives that weren't available on anything else compared to PS5. Now PS5 are also having a slight self-destructive situation where they're moving games to PC within 2 years, which can be good if the games, you know, God of War was a good example of one that worked for them. But Spider-Man, I don't think did great. Last of Us didn't do great. Certainly, Sackboy didn't do great. So there's games, and Returnal, which is an excellent, superb game, didn't set the world alight on PC. So there's definitely these areas, but every game had a 2-year window, give or take, apart from Uncharted Lost Legacy, where they didn't actually deliver a game on PC day and date. They'll never do that because they understand the market, and that's just self-destructive activity. And that's what Xbox don't get, because they just drive the market. And that's, again, bringing it back to the point that they don't understand it, they don't think things through. They're money-driven, they're profit-driven. Every company is, absolutely. But you have to balance that. Your commercial decisions have to have a route. They have to have an end game. And you have to drive engagement, which they talk about all the time and don't even use figures anymore. And you do that by giving people what they want. Now, Sony, you know, let's not beat around the bush. I said this before. They've really dropped the ball. And I said it earlier in this video, in fact. They don't have enough first-party games coming out. They are definitely behind their original plan. No one's saying that's not the case. Absolutely. But they're still delivering big, huge exclusives that people want to play. You know, like it or not, Spider-Man 2 is one of the biggest games of the year, and you can only play it on PlayStation 5. And it's using the hardware, it's using the technology, and it looks great, and it plays great, and it's not like I said, I didn't even put it in my category of games that I would have awarded best game of the year, because it's a great game, but it's not significantly different from the previous one. It just has an updated engine, an updated elements, an updated storyline, but it really isn't a significant shift over the previous game. There's definitely some stuff in there that wouldn't be done on the PS4, but Xbox have nothing. Everything you can play on Xbox for the first 2 years, you could play on Xbox One. Only this year have they got exclusives, and they're still available on PC. And that is the point that people seem to forget. Microsoft, that's where their end game. They know that. But people in denial of Xbox will just be Game Pass. It's never going to be hardware anymore. And this market has kind of reinforced the fact that that's where they're at, and that's where they're going to end up, I'm afraid. And that's a shame. That is a real shame, because we need competition. But really, Xbox only have themselves to blame. I want competition. Anyone should want competition. And right now, Sony's biggest competition is Sony. And potentially Nintendo. And possibly Apple, if they get their game going with the iPhone and the next their iPad, and they start bringing all those things together with the collection of Apple Arcade. And quality's getting there. It's getting close. Yeah, at this point, you know, people will moan, but I did expect it. It's not a shock to me that Xbox has fallen so far, but it is kind of, hopefully, an eye-opener that they need to pick up that ball and fix it, because it's a problem. Next, talking of other problems, retro overload. So one of the things that I've always been into retro before it was retro, because I grew up with the stuff, but the prices of retro went mad in the last 10 years. It kind of ramped up. Well, probably, I suppose, when the more 8 to 5 years ago, it got crazy. I wouldn't say it's getting better, not at all, because you've still got stupid prices. But I think the hubble bubble around it has kind of died off. But a good example of what I mean by ruining the marketplace in terms of there's a spirit. So there's a spirit to things. So me as a motorcyclist, there's a spirit when you go to motorcycle meets, when you go to racetracks, when you do club racing, when you do all those things. There's a spirit to it that if you're not part of it, you kind of fall out quite quickly. People pick up that you're not really into it. You're just there for the sake of it. There's a spirit of why it's there. I'm not saying you gatekeep and you keep people out, but if people just kind of turn up all the gear and no idea is the example I mean. So you get people that have loads of money and they buy a nice bike and they buy great gear, but they can't ride. They don't really enjoy riding and there's no fun in it. They just want to be part of something, which is fine, but it limits what other people will do with you, because if you can't keep up, you won't go that way. Retro became that way. You got all these people online, all these YouTube channels, and they're not really into retro. I mean, one of my pet peeves is people talking about eras they didn't grow up in. And not a pet peeve, but I think it's dangerous. I think it's dangerous that we've got a lot of young people that are in their 30s and they're talking about areas and eras they didn't grow up in. But because of YouTube and the fact that they can see videos from 1982 and things came out, they associate themselves with an era they weren't really connected to. And therefore you create this disconnect and you yearn. I know people that yearn for the 70s and the 80s, and they were born in 1993. It's not healthy. And I think YouTube specifically and Twitter and online videos and the plethora of stuff that you can get online creates this disconnect that people have. And the second part is it's money. It's the most popular, give or take, thing on YouTube. So therefore people want to get into it, and it's an easy way. And that's driven prices, because therefore people have gone out and buy these hard to get hold of. They've snapped them up. And that leaves the market with a lot less demand, or higher demand, and a lot less stock, and therefore prices go up. So that's one area where I think, it's a negative with the craze of online. But going back to the Retrotink, Mike Chee's stuff is excellent. The quality is superb. He's got his heart in the right place, and he's creating top tier retro reconstructed images back to LCD. So he's reconstructing line doublers. It's really good quality. Don't get me wrong on that score. But his latest one with the 5X Pro, it's almost $1,000. And that, for me, that's when I'm like, do you know what, I'm out at that point, because that's too expensive. It's like all these retro Game Boy handhelds that are made and everyone's going on about them. I'd rather just buy an old Game Boy and fix it and play it, because that's the spirit, in quotes, of it. I did it with my CRT videos. If you're spending a fortune, an absolute fortune, on retro, you're doing it wrong. And what I mean by that is you're missing the point of retro. Retro is to honour the classics and keep it alive as it was. It's like, I would imagine, railway collecting from years gone by. So when people used to get men that would go to meets with old train tracks and miniatures and all these sets that grew up in the 40s when they were big, and there were kids in the 40s, and then in the 70s and 80s they were middle-aged and they were reliving their youth. It's an equivalent of that. Going, a brand new company comes out and starts taking over the world by going, we're going to just make old hardware look new and old trains look new and brand. They'll be like, no, that isn't what I want, mate. I want the original Hornby classic from the day. I don't want a rebuild of that old train. And that's what I think retro's missing. And the Retrotink 5X Pro, longest name ever, is a good example of that. It's got 4K output from, Commodore 64, for example. You can see some examples here, right? So there's basic functionality. I've covered this before in some of my videos, but if you're outsourcing retro hardware to modern TV, the understanding concept behind it is CRT is a completely different technology to LCDs, OLEDs. Yeah, they're pretty much the same technology. They're hold and display images rather than a phosphor-based display mechanism that CRT is on. Go and look at my videos around CRT and repairs. I've discussed it to death. So when you want retro hardware on modern displays, resolution it's a problem, but it's not a big problem to an extent. So here you can see me using, so the output's the biggest problem here. So RF was a big thing. So when you were properly living in the day, you didn't have, not everyone had SCART. Americans never had it anyway. So you had composite, and that's not as good. So your image output is already a problem. So a lot of American retro, which drives a lot of retro, talk about, RGB mods. We had RGB in the UK for years and years and years. Our 8-bit micros were all RGB capable. So it's not this huge, amazing thing that's brand new. It's brand new on the internet because it's largely on YouTube, American-based, but we already had it. But unless you had a monitor, which is why monitors were big on the 64 and the ST and the Amiga, you tended to not have a very RGB capable screen. So not all screens, even though they had SCART, were RGB capable. So you didn't get an RGB output, you still just got a composite signal, which is not as good. But here's an example of going from the worst in RF cables, which can have interference, and this looks worse on an LCD than it does on a CRT, because CRTs are designed for it and they filter it out in terms of how their display works. So if you're going from this to RGB, you can see here on an example, beautiful picture, absolutely crisp and clean, makes a huge difference. Clarity's there, sharpness is there, you can see the detail in the imagery, that makes a huge difference. This is I made this myself from an old DVD player that had a throughput for feeds through. Just took the board off, modified the chip a little bit, increased the gain, put some new caps on it, and therefore we've got a home-built capture card that allows me to upscale to 1080i. It looks great, it works great. It will also de-interlace natively within the hardware because it's part of what's within the capture card. It cost me bugger all. It cost me a £5 DVD player that I pulled apart and fixed and turned it into this as a mod. This works and it's cheap as chips. That's the spirit of retro. Get that not everyone can do that, and that's fine. So then you get other options where you can go out and buy them. And the Retrotink started there. You know, £100, £150, okay, fair enough. It works. You can feed in a nice cheap source, composite, SCART, and get a nice clean output to HDMI. Absolutely. But when you're spending £750, what you're really paying for is the filters that's been created for this device. And they look great. The CRT filters really help the image quality on the screen. But I guarantee you could do this through a feed on a PC and feed it out to your screen. You might get slightly more latency because that's one of the things that he does do. But $750, for me, I wouldn't buy it. I just wouldn't buy it because I just don't think it keeps in check the reasons behind retro. And again, you can disagree with me, and that's the point of these discussions. My opinion isn't fact. My opinion is my opinion. I don't feel that this device really has a marketplace other than YouTubers. That's what it's for. And he knows his market, and that's fair enough. But call it out. It's not. If you're living in your house and you're playing on your LCD and you want to relive, if you were there at the time, you're reliving the nostalgia. RF frequency signals and hiss is part of the nostalgia. But if you can get a clean image on a CRT, you're probably going to do that because that's where you remember and that's how we played it. But if you're a modern retro YouTuber that wants the best image upscale to make videos on it and have the sharpest filters everywhere and not have to post-process that in the footage you've captured, then that's where this makes sense. But that's the market he's going for. And for me, this almost ruins the retro market because it commercializes it to a point where other companies come in. And again, it brings us to these replica consoles that have come out everywhere and get reviewed everywhere that are really just the old hardware using FPGA to emulate a piece of hardware. You can emulate a lot of old consoles, computers, micros from the day on anything now. Your phone can do it. If it's a commercialized product, then for me, it's no longer a real, genuine retro reason. A lot of the good stuff that's in the marketplace now in the community that I've bought, other people have bought and supported, is made by people who love and live it, and therefore that's doing it out of passion. And this feels like it's become a business, which in itself is not a problem, but I think the price just is too high. The market at this point, like I say, it's not aimed at the retro market. It's aimed at the YouTube retro market, which is not one in the same. And I'm sure it will get a lot of press and a lot of people will get review hardware. I obviously won't, but that's fine. I'm not asking for it, but I don't see the point in it. The filters look great, I must admit. The filters look great, and the quality is undeniable. Absolutely not denying it. I'm not even denying it costs that much to make, because he's probably spent a fortune on R&D to make this device, and in terms of software development and what's running on the box. But for me, it's just like the spirit. At that point, that's when you go, do you know what, I'm out. Last one is Cyberpunk 2077 Ultimate Edition. Yes, hardly anything but. So I saw this on Twitter, spoke to, asked the question. I didn't get a response. But effectively what we've got here is an Ultimate Edition. So they're making the effort to release physical discs that have to be shipped to a store, to your house, to Amazon, to wherever you buy it from, on the PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series X and S, and the PC. But only the Xbox versions have the physical game on the disc and all the content. Both PC and PlayStation 5 are just a download key. So I'm assuming GOG for the PC version and the PlayStation Store for the PS5 version. And at that point, this is bringing me back to my older moan, and again, I'm not moaning at the moment, but I try and keep things balanced. Physical media is the most important thing to me because it's tangible. You know, you look back at your old games and you remember opening the box, the big boxes of Commodore Amiga, Commodore 64 games, the cartridges of the Mega Drive, the tapes of the Commodore 64, the floppy disks, the 3.5-inch discs, everything that you had growing up, the CDs when they came in, when you had CD, Mega CD, 3DO, the Amiga CD32, all those things came. It was a generational leap, but it's all based on physical stuff that you had in your hand. So that's what I like, and that's why when it's all digital, I'm out, because then it's not the same thing. It's like music. Music died when it became online streaming, when Spotify killed it, because there's no connection anymore. So then it leans on going to concerts, but you can't do that with games. You can't go to a live gameplay session. You don't own the game. You don't own the film. It's not the same anymore. So fundamentally, having an ultimate edition that isn't physically on the disc is pointless. And people will say, well, do you know what? That's the digital medium. Okay, fine. But then don't release a digital physical box then. And this is likely, I surmise this on Twitter, because PlayStation have a quality control mechanism and a certification process that means if they're releasing a new version with new binaries on a disc, you need to recompile it, recert it all. It's all got to be retested, and that costs money, time, and effort. And Xbox probably have a lower level of entry on that. So they can just ship the old code on that disc and get it out the door. And that's probably why they're doing it. I don't know that. That's me surmising, but that's probably the reason why. It's what I said on the tweet. The fact is that PlayStation has a cost, and that cost doesn't make any sense. And then for PC, it's because everyone's accepted it now, and that's long since been digital only. And again, I was around before PC existed, let alone it being physical. If you're going to make a physical disc, here's an idea, and GOG of all people should do this because that's what they stand for, having the no DRM, you own the media, it's all yours. So I'm sure this is a free GOG. Once you've got it, you can install it anywhere, but I guarantee there's some link to online on it, and that's a pain for me because the review code that I covered linked you to online. You had to be online to play it, and I've not checked again if that's been disconnected. But if they're releasing a physical disc and making the effort for a physical disc, then make it physical. Otherwise, it's a token gesture. You're just releasing a disc to improve sales without actually doing the bare minimum of what you're releasing, which is a disc to play the game on. If you buy this in Timbuktu for your daughter or son to play, and they haven't got an internet connection, then it's worthless. And people say everyone's got an internet connection. That's not true. The whole world doesn't have the internet, and the whole world plays games without internet. That's also a thing. And the reality is, if you're releasing something that says physical ultimate edition, the two things in that sentence are physical and ultimate. So if you've got less content and it's not physically available on the disc, you're failing at 2 of 3. Because it's certainly an edition, but only the Xbox has got all things right, which is great for them. And I just wish that CDP would put the effort in and just pay the money and do it properly. Otherwise, don't do it at all. And stagger it. Release the Xbox version now and release the PlayStation 5 and the PC version later with a physical copy of it. Because in years to come, going back to retro, that'll be worth something because it's a physical edition of the game that's available on the disc. And that's what Ultimate Edition should always be about. It's like if a game comes out and it's in a bad state, release it, and then get a later edition that comes out that's been updated with all the latest patches, any DLC, all put into one place, and you've got it physically. It's a complete edition, as they used to be called. And people say this like, that's the digital age we live in. Games that will always used to ship complete. No, they didn't. There's many games when I was a kid on the 8-bit that were broken, and you couldn't finish them. And that was all fixed by people basically cracking the game. There was many games that you couldn't finish without the cracked version of the game because there was bugs in it, and there was games that were fixed in second reruns, so second presses of certain games were pushed out with updates on there. There were games that weren't fixed forever. I think Jet Set Willy had a massive problem in it where he couldn't finish the last level. That's off the top of my head, but there's definitely games that I remember as a kid that you couldn't finish, and it was like, this is broken, it's got to be broken. Yeah, it's not new. It's always been the case. It's just now it's so big that people jump on the fact that it's become a way out of it. So again, physical editions is not a physical edition. Not a good step forward in my opinion, and it is a slippery slope, I must admit. Okay, finally, positivity. So, retro nostalgia section. This time we're going back 30 years only to 1993, give or take this day, in America at least. The Atari Jaguar, the final throw of the dice for Atari, was made not long after Commodore had folded. This came out, and it was a very rushed to market, famously issues galore in its 3D rendering, and had a hardware bug. And I've covered the Atari Jaguar in a previous retro, so go and check that out. Some of the footage you're seeing here is from that, because I've used it as a snapshot. But the Jaguar was a great piece of kit in terms of it's almost the middle ground between the 16 and 32-bit. It was still cartridge based. It still had pretty good sound. It was very Amiga-ish in terms of the sound samples and music, and it was still driven largely by a lot of European companies and some American companies pushing games. And it had some good games on it. Alien vs Predator was probably the biggest one that had all the hoo-ha about it, and it's still a great game. It doesn't run that well, but it's still a good game for its day, if a bit boring. But the ideas were there, and there was a lot of games like this. But there's some good stuff on it. The original, Rayman was built for it, and I did a whole video on Rayman, which covered the Atari Jaguar Saturn, and there's not a huge difference between them. So it could and would have done well had it had the investment, and had the 3D bug been fixed, it probably would have been better hardware. But overall, I think it was a good attempt from Atari, but they were screwed over by IBM with some of the issues they had there. But fundamentally, that was because Atari didn't have the money to pay IBM, and therefore they held on to things and didn't ship things in time, and that impacted their launch, and yada, yada, yada. So, as I say, I covered a lot of this in my retro perspective, which I need to go back and finish part 2, actually. That's something I need to do. But it's a great console. It was a great machine. It had options and capabilities that were ahead of the time. It certainly did sprite scaling as well as the big arcades of the time in terms of the late 80s. And it could have done a lot better had it had the investment. And it was a great time in terms of lots of new technology coming out. So, the late 80s, early 90s, if you think about it from a logical perspective, you had 85. The Amiga was there's nothing. I can't think of a machine that was more ahead of the time than the Commodore Amiga. It came out in 1985, and you can still play games on it from the 90s that compete with things like the Super Nintendo and the Mega Drive, and they came out in 89 and 91. So there's a huge delta between the time you think about that and what we're talking 6-7 years from something being made to still competing. Okay, it didn't win on everything, but it competed with the competition. The Atari Jaguar probably could have had legs way into the mid to late 90s had it had investment to push it harder. The CD-ROM would have helped on space and interactivity, which would have been a big drive. And it might not have competed with the likes of the 3DO, I suppose, but it could have done enough. We live in a world now where you've got the Switch that's outselling everything else at certain points of the year and last year, and that's hardly top-of-the-range hardware. It's mobile technology, bad mobile technology at best. So the Atari Jaguar, I think, was, again, a good sign of the times. If you don't have the investment, if you don't put the effort in, you end up with, unfortunately, a machine that doesn't live or stand the test of time and had a very short lifespan. Same as I've covered in the last video, the Amiga CD32. Great machine, had loads of capabilities, really jumped on the back of the burgeoning media market in terms of CD-ROM and interactive medium. All of that was the big thing. And it failed. But the Atari Jaguar could have been the last success for Atari, but it wasn't really a full-on delivery. The problem with the Atari Jaguar was they put in a bit of effort, but very quickly ran out of steam and ran out of money, and that's what happens. But yeah, so Atari Jaguar, go and check out my retro, which is a little bit more chirpy around the hardware and what's available on it. But it was a great time, the 90s. The early 90s were a great time for new technology, new hardware, and the Atari Jaguar was one of many that came out. You think about 1991, the Mega CD was coming out in the UK, and then we knew about it in Japan. And then by 1994 in Japan, 95 in the UK, you already had the PS1 and the Saturn. And they really are the bedrock for what modern gaming is now. They started all that 3D worlds off, really delivering genuine 3D. Yeah, the poor issues galore. But the Jaguar is almost the missing link between that. And that's what I mean about the Jaguar. It's a great piece of hardware. And it predates all of those genuine 32-bit machines, such as the 3DO, which was the first one, and then obviously the PS1, the Saturn. So yeah, great piece of hardware, great time, lots of fond memories of that time, even though I never bought an Atari Jaguar at the time, because I just knew it was going to flop. It was pretty obvious. it's still a great machine, and I bought one much later for a lot less money. Again, bringing it back to the joys of retro, and when it wasn't oversubscribed, it didn't cost you an arm and a leg, and a Retrotink 5X Pro. Anyway, that's it for another database episode. Remember, if you are a patron, you can post your questions and your queries about anything that you want me to talk about. I haven't got anything for this month, so I'll end it there in just about an hour. But if you are, you can post them on there, and I will put them in the very next video. And if you're not, then you can join and help subscribe and share and all that good stuff on my Patreon. Get access to exclusive content, early access such as this, which was up early for patrons. And I've got a bit more coming up over the next month because I've got no genuine delivery work in my full-time job. And I've got no huge amounts of deliveries because all the big games have come out now, bar one. So I'll be speaking to you all very soon on more videos to come. If I do see you then, thank you very much for watching and listening. If I don't, then I'll see you hopefully on another one. Take care. Bye-bye.